Hi everyone, this is Mike Fitz. I am a fellow with Explore.org and the Bear Cams, and in just a moment I'm going to be hosting a live play-by-play style broadcast where I will be narrating the bear and salmon activity at Brooks River. So please stand by for that. I'll be with you in just a moment. Hi everyone, this is Mike Fitz, a fellow with Explore.org, and I will be hosting a live play-by-play broadcast in just a moment. So please stand by. Good day to you, no matter where you happen to may be around the world, and welcome to this latest live broadcast brought to you by Explore.org and Katmai National Park. My name is Mike Fitz, and I am a fellow with Explore.org. I'm also a former park ranger at Katmai National Park, and during the next hour, I will be here narrating the bear and salmon activity that we see at Brooks Falls. So this is a live unscripted broadcast. I will hopefully do my best to describe the behavior of the bears and salmon and whatever else happens to show up over the next hour. But I won't be monitoring the chat on Explore.org, so you may not see me answer your questions directly. But hopefully, if you have a lot of the basic questions, hopefully I'll be able to answer a lot of the basic questions that you might have about these brown bears here in Katmai National Park. There are many wonderful camera operators who are panning the cameras from place to place, so they will be controlling the cameras. I won't be doing that directly. So you may hear me from time to time typing to send them a message, or they may be sending me a message to alert me of bear activity that they happen to see and think that it might be interesting for me to talk about. So I'd like to thank them in advance for being here today and allowing everyone to have such a wonderful bear watching experience. These cameras are located in Katmai National Park, Alaska. This is about 300 miles southwest of Anchorage. There are no roads, so access to this location is only by plane or boat. Brooks River gets about 10,000 people a year visiting, primarily to see brown bears fishing at Brooks Falls. And there's actually a lot of salmon activity still going on, and a lot of bears for this time of the year too. In fact, I wasn't really expecting to be able to do these style of broadcasts at this time of the year because I thought the bear activity would be much diminished compared to what it is in July. July is usually the peak of the bear fishing season at Brooks Falls, but we're seeing still a very strong salmon run so far this year. So a lot of bears are sticking around, and I think there's plenty to talk about during the next hour. To give you a little bit of a preview of what some of the other views that we might be able to see during the broadcast, so we have the main falls cam that you're looking at right now, and then I'll be able to transition to a sort of a bear's eye view of the waterfall. Both of these cameras are located on wildlife viewing platforms where people stand to watch brown bears. And we can also go down to the mouth of the river as well. There are several cameras there. So if bears are in this vicinity, we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the mouth of the river. And we'll take a look down at the There's one looking more towards the mouth, and then there's one that looks a bit more upstream. And then there's also an underwater camera, and that one's a little cloudy today. We'll talk about the reasons why it's a little bit cloudy right now, why the visibility in the water is a bit degraded, but you can see that there's still a lot of salmon moving in the water. And I also have some still images that I might be able to drop into the feed from time to time. And again, my name is Mike Fitz. I'm a fellow with Explore.org, and let's see what the action is showing us. And as I was actually watching the camera before I started the broadcast, I noticed that there's one bear on the lip right now, and this the one that's closest to us, that spot on the waterfall, on the top of the waterfall, is a female bear who's actually caring for 4 of her cubs, and her cubs might not be visible at the moment. Hopefully they'll come a little bit closer out of the brush, and we'll get a good look at them. But that female on top of the waterfall, closest to the camera, is number 402, and this is her second litter of 4 cubs that she's caring for. Not only is that interesting, but she's also fishing next to 2 of her offspring from other litters. So 402 has had 6 litters that we know of, and there's a bear right down below her in the plunge pool, that jacuzzi below Brooks Falls. That is number 503, and he is from a 2013 litter. And then we have another bear just on the other side of 402, also on the top of the waterfall. And that one, to me, looks like another offspring of hers. That one, I think, is 812. Both of those bears that I just mentioned, 503 and 812, are male bears. 503 in the jacuzzi, he is a young adult male. He's about 6 years old, and the bear on the top of the waterfall next to 402 is just a few years younger than him. Actually, just if I remember correctly, just a year younger, or 2 years younger, excuse me. So they're not separated by much as far as age goes. So 402 she's struggled, raising some of her litters in the past, and there's been instances where she's lost her entire litter, but she's also been very successful over some of the past couple of litters. So she just caught another fish, is going to eat that fish will be converted to milk very quickly for her hungry offspring. We also saw 503 just kind of move out of the jacuzzi, and I wonder if that means there's another bear sort of approaching the vicinity. So we'll watch out for him. So 402 right now eating her fish, and we're not seeing her cubs at the moment. Earlier today, she was fishing on the lip of the waterfall, and her cubs were in the vegetation just off of the edge of the river. Sometimes they were visible, oftentimes they weren't. But they will come up to the edge of the waterfall occasionally. And we might see 402 turn back and look behind her from time to time. And that's a lot of what I like to describe as vigilance behavior. Mother bears really do have to pay attention to their surroundings, make sure that their cubs are protected, there's no threats that are approaching them. And that takes away from the time that they can focus on catching fish. And that's one reason, there's an example of it, her turning back and looking for her cubs. So that they have to devote a ton of energy to their offspring, and that vigilance behavior is one of the reasons why mother bears are typically thinner than single adult females. So if we see some of our single adult females or large adult females come to Brooks River, we might notice that they are much fatter than 402. It's an extreme energetic challenge for her to raise and wean these 4 offspring. According to our records at Brooks River, there's never been a bear that has weaned all 4 offspring from the same litter. So they've always lost at least 1 cub, sometimes entire litters. So this is a chance for 402, since she has a lot of experience, to maybe give these cubs an extra chance to survive into the sub-adult years. And she's not wasting any of that fish, an indication that she's a hungry bear. We've seen a lot of bears over the past few days catching and discarding part of the salmon carcasses. There's been quite a few salmon in the river still, like I mentioned before at the top of the broadcast. The 402 eating the whole fish definitely needs all of those calories that the fish provide. Can't really afford to waste any. And if she moves off into the bushes, that's going to give us an idea about where her cubs might be. So, yeah, it looks like at least one of those cubs could be visible as that's a little dark brown dot there. Yeah, there's at least one or two that are visible, just sitting there hanging tight. 402 often stashes her cubs in that location or nearby, and then goes to fish the lip of the waterfall. So she just might have been coming back to maybe reassure them, hey, I'm here. This is currently a safe place for you. He is taking a risk by coming to the waterfall as well. Being around all these other bears does pose a risk to her cubs. In fact, she has lost cubs to other bears here at Brooks Falls. She's had cubs killed in this location. But mother bears are always weighing that risk versus reward in their lives, because the reward in food can be very, very great, but the risk can also be very great as well. If you end up losing one or more of your cubs to another bear in this location, then it may not be worth it. 402 seems to be one of those bears that more consistently comes to the waterfall when she has young cubs. A lot of bears will avoid the waterfall when they have young cubs. In fact, there's another female with spring cubs that we saw on the cameras earlier today. She was near the mouth of the river, number 94, and she's a bear that really doesn't come to the waterfall unless she has older cubs or she's single. Number 409 Bead Nose is one of those, another one of those bears. Number 435 Holly, another one of those bears that avoids the waterfall when she has young offspring, and they'll maybe come up to the waterfall when they have yearlings or older cubs. But 402 is one of those bears that tends to push the boundaries and seek that real reward, even though there's greater risks involved. And I'm not sure where 503 went. He sort of wandered to the far side of the river and then came right back. Again, he's the bear in the jacuzzi, that plunge pool right below Brooks Falls. He was fishing in a very interesting spot earlier because he was so deep in the jacuzzi. It's very deep in that spot. You can see a little bit of interaction right now between 503 and another bear that's near him. 402 was looking back towards 812, who was moving in the direction of the cubs. Most likely he'll ignore the cubs, but now 402 is really paying attention, and now she's attacking him. Maybe she didn't realize right away that he was intent on going in that direction, but she's reminding him of how defensive she can be, and she needs to stay away from her cubs. And her cubs probably scattered from that interaction. They probably ran up into the grass right behind where they were standing. So now she's going to check on them. Again, mother bears really always have to be vigilant. They always have to be on the lookout for threats to their offspring, and that was just a really great example of that. I'm sure mother bears recognize their former offspring and vice versa, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they give any breaks to their former offspring. They're not going to necessarily say, hey, I remember you, remember when we were a family, maybe I'll be nice to you. That doesn't really work like that in the bear world. They certainly will compete very, very vigorously for access to food resources at Brooks Falls. So even though we suspect 812 was a former offspring of 402, that doesn't mean that she was going to be nice to him or he was going to be nice to her. We just caught a glimpse of 402 coming back, and there's a couple of her cubs in the grass there. Maybe looks like they're coming back out into our line of sight right now. Here she comes up to check on them. Cubs are often full of energy and playfulness and curiosity, but their overall mood and stress level really reflects what mother is feeling. They watch their mother very closely. Of course, they're intent on learning her lessons, that she's trying to teach them about where to fish, where to find food, how to interact with other bears. But if mother bear is stressed out, then the cubs are going to act stressed out. So those are, sort of some of those life lessons that she's passing on to them. Hey, these are situations where you need to pay attention. Hey, these are situations where you can be relaxed. We can't see all 4 of the cubs right now, so one is probably still just out of our line of sight. You can see that there's actually, yes, we can't see all 4 of the cubs. Sorry, one was hiding behind another. You can see there's a considerable size difference between the cubs. And we talk about competition among adult bears, but there's also competition among litters of cubs too. Mothers don't really share food with their cubs. They may tolerate cubs tearing food away from her, for example. If she comes over to this location and eats a salmon, they're going to show curiosity towards it. They're going to try to bite pieces of salmon and tear it away from her. And oftentimes mother bears are tolerant of that, but she's not going to distribute food to her cubs. So there is certainly competition within the litter for food that they may gain access to because of mom, or also for the most productive milk-producing teats. So not all teats on a mother bear produce milk at the same rate. It seems like during the active season right now, the top 2 teats near her front legs are the most productive, and we usually see the biggest cubs dominate access to that location. So the smaller cubs often get shoved aside and maybe don't have as much access to milk. And that can maybe help explain a little bit of the size differences we see amongst large litters of cubs. Because there definitely seems to be, in litters of 3 or more cubs, 1 or more tend to be smaller, and a couple tend to be bigger. And that's my hypothesis anyway on why we might see such size differences. And of course, there's also the other reason, the obvious one you can think of, that some bears just grow faster than others, and just like some people grow faster than others too. So some bears could be, even at the cub age, could be genetically predisposed just to grow a little bit quicker. Really great view of the cubs right now. I'm going to turn away from them for just a little bit. We're going to go down to our false low cam here, because I mentioned how 503, the bear, the young adult male who's in the jacuzzi, was fishing in a kind of a peculiar manner before, because usually bears, when they fish that spot, are away from the waterfall, just about 5 feet downstream of where he is, because that's very deep in that spot. He's probably standing on his hind legs in that spot. Most of the water near Brooks Falls is fairly shallow, but that's probably the deepest location, at least that I know of. And I know it's deep because I've been in there. I went in there in early June one year before the bears happened to arrive, and I didn't actually expect it to be as deep as it is in that spot. So I kind of crawled up along the base of the waterfall, and then I at the base of the waterfall, and then right where that 503 bear is right now, I sort of hopped in, and I wasn't expecting it to be so deep, and I was actually turned over a couple of times by the force of the water. So it's a very deep spot, and we also more often see bears further out where they can gain a little bit of extra traction and hold steady in the water. The 503 is a young bear. He's very playful, very energetic, very well fed. So again, he's still exploring his world. A lot of the adult bears kind of know exactly what they want to do and how they want to do it. Younger bears are more apt to explore, try different things. You can teach an old bear new tricks, but it definitely seems like younger bears are more likely to take a different approach to things given the opportunity. And several other bears still fishing at Brooks Falls. We have, from a distance, it looks like several adults in that far pool on the backside, and then maybe an adult female fishing near the log just behind 503. And one younger bear just coming into our line of sight. kind of hovering on the fringes, maybe looking to pick up any scraps. I'm going to send a message to our camera operators here. So 402 was on the bank there. She's just behind some of those willows and balsam poplars that are right in the edge of the river. It seemed like she might have gotten a little bit spooked by 812's presence earlier, walking towards her cubs. So now she's going to hang tight near them, maybe get them settled down, maybe settle herself down before she goes and tries to fish the lip of the waterfall. And we're going to take a look at our 4 pool over here. We have, again, several adult bears there. So the one that's eating a salmon on the upstream side, that looks like it could be number 801. He's an adult male, very wide set ears. That's one of the ways that I happen to recognize him. And then the one standing downstream of the bear eating a fish is number 480 Otis. So he's one of the older bears on the river. He's at least 22 years old. He's certainly the oldest adult male that we know of at Brooks River. Oh, and I may have made a mistake on one of my IDs earlier. It looks like perhaps number 503 is standing against that far wall back there. He sort of has those lighter blonde ears, so we might be looking at 812 in that jacuzzi, just really, really deep down in there. You can see him kind of bouncing back and forth, and again, that's an indication that the water, the current is fairly strong. I've thrown out a lot of names, or excuse me, nicknames, and then a few and a lot of numbers for these bears. And if you're not familiar with these brown bears, or maybe you want a few more hints about identifying them, please go to Katmai's website. So you can go to nps.gov/KATM and look for the ebook section, or you can just type in Katmai ebooks into a search engine, and it should be the first page that pops up. You can also find a link to it on explore.org on any of the BearCam pages if you scroll down to the more info section. And I'm directing you there because there's a really great resource called The Bears of Brooks River. It's a guide to their behavior and identification. So many of the bears that you see at Brooks River right now are featured in that book, and it'll give you tips on their behaviors and their physical characteristics that it can help you to differentiate between these different bears, because it is difficult at first, and I make mistakes somewhat frequently, more frequently than I would like to admit, with identifying the bears. But I also find it really fascinating to identify them over weeks, seasons, and years, because each one of these bears has an opportunity to tell us a little bit about their stories, and their stories tell us more about what it means really to live in the bear world. What does it mean to live with a nearly insatiable appetite, where you need to eat a year's worth of food in 6 months or less? They tell us stories about the competition that they face between one another. They also give us, some examples of perhaps joy that they face in their lives as we see cubs playing with one another and young bears playing with one another. And we've seen a lot of examples of that over recent days too, with younger bears playing at the mouth of Brooks River, and also at Brooks Falls. So number 480, he's fairly recognizable back in that far pool there. You can see him. He has a slightly floppy right ear. He's also very sizable. But boy, look how tall 503 is just standing there. He is very big for his age. He really does, at least it seems like he has the potential to be a very large bear. And again, if you're not really familiar with recognizing him, he's the bear that walked in between the bear in the foreground and Otis in the background. So again, we have 480 Otis at the in a spot we like to call his office in the far pool there. That's where he loves to make a living. 503 right up against that waterfall. And then number 801, another adult male standing in the shallows kind of near the rock. 801 has very wide set ears. Earlier in the summer he had a lot of scars around his face and neck, which is typical for an adult male. They often get in fights with one another, at least brief altercations over access to food, and especially in the summer and late spring for access to females. So whether or not those scars were from those things, I can't say for sure because he sort of showed up with them. But that's something that a lot of these bears have at the beginning of the year. And I mentioned this on the last broadcast as well, but the bears are really starting to change their physical characteristics quite rapidly because they're gaining weight each and every day. At this time of the year, they can really start to gain maybe 1 to 2 pounds of fat per day. So they're putting on significant amounts of weight at this time of the year. And they also have shed their old fur coats, and their darker ones come in a lot, or their new ones come in a lot darker than their old ones. So this is number 801 from earlier in the year, actually from July 6th. And he, as you can see right now, is definitely a lot darker. We had a little bit of shuffling going on at the waterfall. Bears sometimes, or maybe quite often, will change locations. But a lot of the bears kind of settle back down to where they were before. 402 is back on the lip, and looks like 812 is back in that same spot. Maybe a bit of a friendly interaction going on the far side of the waterfall here. Not sure. One bear definitely wants to play. The other one, maybe not so much. Looks like that is 503, the taller bear, standing in front of the other one. Bears, when they want to play, will approach each other with sort of like their heads up. They'll shake their heads, sort of back and forth, sway their heads, I guess would be a more accurate way to put it. They may nuzzle each other to signal their intent that this is a friendly interaction. And younger bears are certainly more apt to play than older bears. It seems like the frequency of play definitely decreases as bears age. 503 is still at an age where we do see bears playing quite often, so it's not abnormal for a bear his age to play. But every once in a while we'll see an older bear that will play, and sometimes that can be a bit surprising to me. And in fact, there's a bear yesterday or the day before, number 755, who was nuzzling and play fighting with another adult male at Brooks Falls. And 755, he's close to 20 years old himself, so it's not like he's a younger bear. In fact, he was first identified as a young independent bear in 2004, which means it doesn't really say in our records how old 755 was when he was identified, but he was anywhere between 2.5 and 5.5 years old. So if we say he was 3 in 2004, he's certainly close to 20, give or take a couple of years right now. So he was playing before. So well-fed bears, these are more likely to play, and bears that are familiar with one another too. They don't have to necessarily go through the same behavioral postures each and every time they encounter one another. They can remember each other from day to day and year to year, and that helps to reduce conflict in a lot of ways. And when they do play fight, that might be a way that they can hone skills, because the play fights do really mimic actual fights. It's just gentler and often more prolonged. You can see that the biting is just not as intense as a real fight. The cuffing, the jawing, it's just not as intense, and it's often silent. It's not accompanied by any loud vocalizations like in a real sort of aggressive interaction between two bears. It looks like 503 right now. He's back against the far wall eating his salmon. This other bear standing in front of him is probably just in a good position to wait for scraps. I think he or she is waiting patiently for that. So if you are a bear that knows that another bear that's caught a salmon is tolerant of you, can really give you some advantages if you want to make a living by looking for scraps. And that's exactly what this other bear did. He or she knew that 503 was going to tolerate him in that spot, was hoping probably in its own way that 503 would leave some salmon behind. 503 is a very well-fed bear over the past several weeks, so he's been catching a lot of salmon but not eating a lot of salmon, looking for the fattiest parts of the fish and leaving a lot of those scraps for other younger bears. And he just caught another one. So again, he's gaining a lot of skills very rapidly at fishing at Brooks Falls. We had just seen 402. If you're watching the Falls Low Cam, maybe in a different window, we just saw 402 back on the lip, catch a fish and walk away. So her cubs are probably nearby, just out of our line of sight. 812 is still on the lip of the waterfall. He's a bear that, again, just a few years old, but is learning to fish this spot very, very skillfully. Each and every time bears are on the lip of the waterfall, it does take a lot of strength and skill to fish there successfully. Sockeye salmon, which are the majority of the fish that we see migrating and spawning in Brooks River, weigh on average 4 to 7 pounds. So they're not a small fish to catch. So if you have a 7-pound fish flying towards your face and you try to catch it, it does take quite a lot of coordination and strength to do that. At this time of the year, we could start to see, and probably are starting to see, silver salmon moving into Brooks River. Silver salmon are sometimes called coho salmon, depending on the location that you are in North America. In Alaska, it seems like more commonly they're called silver salmon, at least in Bristol Bay, in the Katmai region, and then in the lower 48 states, they're often called cohos. But those fish will come. We have maybe a couple of thousand of those that come into Brooks River each and every year. We're not exactly sure because no one's counting those fish right now. A lot of the fish counts that we have for silver salmon came from the 1950s and 1960s. So their population could be more, it could be less. But right now, if silver salmon move into the river, these bears could be gaining a large energetic reward by fishing for those silver salmon, because silver salmon are bigger and they're fresher from the sea. Salmon stop eating once they once they re-enter fresh water. So the longer that they're in fresh water, the more calories they're going to burn. They're going to have less fat deposits, and they are going to have less protein stores as well. So it's worth a bear's while to catch as many fish early in the season as possible, and as soon as they can when the salmon arrive from the ocean. So bears might be sticking around right now to catch those fresher silver salmon. The 402 is sitting right at the base of an area that's a fish ladder. and the area is no longer, or the ladder is no longer passable to salmon, but she's waiting. Sometimes salmon will swim into that area and she can kind of pounce on them from that direction. We'll still have a fairly good look at her cubs. Cubs are being a little bit playful right now, maybe jumping down to the water. And it looks like the runt of the litter is still up on the bank. And again, she had the last couple of litters that she had, it always seemed like she had a bit of a runt. So, there's maybe just one bear in the litter that doesn't grow as fast as the others, or isn't as competitive to gain access to milk or food scraps that 402 leaves behind. But if 402 catches a fresh sockeye salmon from the ocean, that each one of those fish contains about 4,500 calories. So even though she is energetically challenged to meet the needs of her cubs, she can definitely make a large profit in calories by fishing for these fresh salmon. And a silver salmon is even larger than a sockeye. Silver salmon are 8 to 12 pounds on average. And we're seeing some of the bears catching some pretty large fish. So that's one reason why I suspect that they might be silver or coho salmon that some of these bears are catching. To tell the difference, it can be a little bit difficult between those two species. I'm going to throw up a photo here of sockeye salmon, or actually an illustration of a sockeye salmon in its spawning colors. And we're starting to see a lot of the salmon look like this at this time of the year. Deep red backs, green heads, hooked jaws. So these are spawning sockeye salmon. But a spawning coho is going to look a little bit different. And I don't have a great illustration of that right now, but I do have a photograph I took a few years ago of a coho salmon leaping Brooks Falls. And in their spawning colors, at least, they're going to have green backs and red or maroon sides, and they're going to be larger than average on sockeye salmon. And we might be able to get a glimpse of those on our lower river cameras, on the underwater camera, especially once the water clarity improves. And it looks like it is improving already. The water in the river has been cloudy over the past several days because we've had in the Brooks River area some very strong winds out of the west, and that churns up a lot of the waves on the eastern shore of Lake Brooks, where Brooks River begins, and that those waves just churn up a lot of sediment, and that is carried and flushed down into the river. So that adds to the turbidity and reduces the clarity of the water. But once the waves stop crashing on the eastern shore of Lake Brooks, we can expect the water quality, or water clarity, in Brooks River to improve quite a bit. And we might be able to catch some glimpses of several different species of salmon, and also some rainbow trout, and occasionally a grayling or a whitefish in the river. So 402, again, hovering back and forth between the lip and her cubs. Always seems like she's looking back and forth, maybe a little bit undecided how long she wants to leave those cubs unattended. She occasionally will fish right in that spot, jumping in the water, pouncing on fish. She'll sometimes even dive in the jacuzzi, searching for salmon that might happen to be pooling in there. But her go-to location for productivity, at least, and having a high catch rate is the lip of Brooks Falls. And we do have looks like a young bear maybe down at the mouth of the river. So let's head downstream. These cameras are located at the mouth of Brooks River. So this is about a half-mile downstream of Brooks Falls. And hang on a second. It seems like my feed has frozen in that spot, and so I don't want to talk about a still image for 10 minutes. I might cut back to the waterfall, and we'll go back to this one in just a moment because we know there's a ton of activity up at Brooks Falls right now. So a couple of experienced adult males at Brooks Falls that we're looking at. 480 Otis in that far pool with that floppy right ear. Number 801 standing downstream of the rocks, and number 503 standing just that we can just see a bit of his ear right behind the rock where the gull is standing. You see the contrast in fishing styles between some of these bears. Again, more mature bears kind of know the drill. They're more likely to be patient. They know that if they wait, the reward can be very great. They just need to be patient with it. Younger bears maybe are more likely to explore, maybe run through the river. Again, they're not as well practiced at catching fish. 503, who's in the middle, is very good at it right now, but he still shows a lot of those characteristics of younger bears. Now he's getting a little bit too close to 480, who just squatted the water, but you can see 503 really not paying too much attention to him at all. And that's another indication that 503 could become, a fairly dominant bear in the future. He's still very playful, but he is also inclined to invade the space of some of these other adult males. 480 is not a small bear. He's actually a fairly big adult male. But 503, while not really challenging him for that same fishing spot, is not giving him much attention. So he certainly doesn't seem to think that 480 is a threat. And I can expect if both of these bears come back in subsequent years, 503 grows larger, and he still has a lot of growing to do. 480 will be increasingly likely to yield to 503, so we might see that switch happen in the next couple of years. We'll go back down to the lower river now because we can see that bear swimming through the water. Down at the mouth of the river, bears really can't wait for fish to come to them because there's so many escape routes, so the bears have to more actively search for salmon. Younger bears are taught where to look by their mothers. They will go to the same locations, the same times of the year. They'll also, be curious and explore their own world. But dead and dying salmon is really the target down at the mouth of the Brooks River, especially in late summer and fall. And this area will become a more productive fishing location for a lot of these bears. So the bears will search in places where they know salmon are likely to collect as the river loses its current, loses its energy. So salmon spawn and die, or just weaken for a variety of reasons. They'll drift downstream and collect in a lot of these locations. And we're looking at our Riverwatch camera right now. But if we go to our main lower river camera, which is mounted on the same wildlife viewing platform, just looking in a different direction right now, looks like there's a mother bear who is off in the background, just sitting right on the bank. And again, I'm not 100% sure, but this is a spot where we've seen one bear, a mother number 94, who's been hanging out in this location and not venturing towards the waterfall like 402. So we're seeing a couple of different cub rearing and mothering strategies. One, going for the big reward at Brooks Falls, another standing downstream looking for dead and dying salmon. So perhaps not eating as much, but giving her cubs a greater level of safety because there's less competition for space down at the mouth of the river and less likelihood that she's going to encounter another bear in a situation that might threaten her cubs. Again, mother bears have to be very vigilant, always watching for threats. 94 sometimes will stash her cubs in one of these spruce trees that she's sitting and standing next to right now, and that will allow her a bit more freedom to go into the river and fish. Young cubs, especially, or brown bear cubs, are good at climbing trees. They're not as good as black bears when they grow into adults, especially the larger adult bears really probably can't climb trees. But I've seen some sizable brown bears that Katmai climb trees. So if I was trying to avoid a bear, I certainly wouldn't think a tree is a good option in almost every circumstance because I've just seen some pretty good sized brown bears climb trees. But they are less likely to climb as they grow older. It's physically harder for them because they weigh more, but also their claws just aren't adapted for tree climbing like they are in black bears. Black bears have shorter, more curved claws than brown bears, and that is an adaptation that allows them to climb trees. Brown bears have longer claws that aren't as sharply curved, and that maybe is better for digging, but it's not nearly as good for climbing trees. So young cubs will sometimes go up trees that'll give them a greater level of safety. They'll sometimes flee from a threat by going straight up a tree, and that allows mom to maybe deal with threat without having to necessarily worry about her cubs in those immediate seconds. And sometimes mother bears will put their cubs in a tree and she'll go fish far away, sometimes a quarter mile away or more, and that'll occasionally happen as well. It looks like number 94, yeah, just taking it easy for the moment. Perhaps focusing on something that might be upstream that's catching her attention. But a lot of activity still at Brooks Falls. 2 young bears downstream here. These are bears that we can consider to be sub-adult bears. They're like the teenagers of the bear world. So when we say sub-adult, they're juvenile bears. They're not fully mature yet, but they're independent of their mother. So they're living the life of an independent wild brown bear, but they still have a lot of growing to do. And bears don't reach sexual maturity until they're about 5 or 6 years of age. Like in humans, though, there's no set age where that really happens. In brown and grizzly bears, there have been documented cases of bears reproducing at very young ages, like as young as 4. But often, females, especially in Katmai, we don't see them with their first litter until they're 6, 7, sometimes 8 years of age or older. When we do have such a high abundance of fish, like we have had over the past 2 years and into this summer, that's going to be actually really good for the reproductive rate and survival rate of a lot of cubs. Fatter females give birth to larger litters and at a higher frequency. So if you're a fat single bear, that's going to increase your likelihood of conceiving and having cubs in the den the following year. So some of our single females that we've seen so far this year, like number 409, number 128, they're looking really, really fat, and I would expect that it's quite a good possibility that they could come back with cubs next year. And we're seeing so many younger bears come to Brooks River over the past couple of years, just because there's been so many family groups. You know, at least a dozen cubs over the past couple of years, and every year over the past two, we've seen more bears kind of get kicked out. Mom has said, "Hey, I've raised you, I've weaned you now it's time for you to be on your own." That separation happens in the springtime, and now we're seeing a lot of these younger bears come back to Brooks River because this is, for most of them, probably a spot that they discovered for the first time with their mother. These bears are hovering on the fringes of the waterfall, looking for scraps of salmon. The one bear near the log just caught a fish, and we can see one of those younger bears approaching it quite closely. 402 with another sizable fish. She's caught several during this broadcast alone, so she's already gaining, close to 20,000 calories at least. Bears will steal from one another, and I'm not sure if that was what was happening with that interaction below Brooks Falls just a moment ago. But again, if you're familiar with a bear and you know that bear is friendly to you, you might be more likely to approach it and just kind of stand right next to it as you wait for scraps. It often can look like the bear with the fish initially is feeding salmon to the other one, but it's really just kind of leaving scraps behind. So it's not necessarily sharing fish, it's just leaving those scraps behind for another bear. And it looks like on the far side over there, 801 is getting into the face of another bear. Can't quite tell on my screen who that might be. Oh, and it looks like number 503, who wanted to come back down. So 503 in that instance just stood his ground, waited for the other bear to break off, and then he was able to find access to that far pool once again. All of these bears really do live in a very competitive world. It's a difficult place for them. We see a lot of fun in their lives. We see them waddling through the river after they've eaten dozens of fish. And you can tell that they're quite full. We see in younger bears the playfulness that they have, but it is, again, a very competitive place for them. It's a hard world. So reaffirming those sort of their place in the bear hierarchy from time to time is necessary to protect the access to the fishing spots that you happen to prefer. And 801 is one of those bears that will fish the far pool more often than not. In fact, I haven't really seen him come to the camera side of Brooks Falls, and that may be an indication that he's just not tolerant of people. There's a lot of people standing where the camera are, or where this camera is located right now, and when you see just kind of a wall of people on this side of the river, that might be intimidating to you, so you might just not want to approach this side of the river. And that really, for those bears that are intolerant of people, that limits where they can go in the river. So they may be restricted to the far side of the waterfall, or fishing in places, less productive places where people are less likely to be, or they may have to change their patterns of when they fish. Maybe they become a bit more crepuscular. They come out during dawn and dusk when they can still see, but the platforms are closed to people. So at this time of the year, the Brooks Falls platform closes at 10 p.m. to people, and then it reopens at 7 a.m. And that's to allow some of the bears that aren't tolerant of people an opportunity to come down to the waterfall, because there are many bears along Brooks River that are quite cryptic, and we don't happen to see them during the middle of the day when we're active. You can see just how easy it is for 801, that bear in the foreground. To catch and eat his fish. That water there is only a few inches deep. We'll often see salmon swimming through there. You can see their backs and tails sticking out of the water. So with all of the foam and the shallow water, it's really hard for salmon to swim through there without getting swept back downstream. And that's what bears are waiting for really in that spot, especially 801. He seems to, when he's well fed on days like today, he's waiting for fish just to drift right down into his front paws where he can just step on it and then grab it with his big canine teeth. We'll see how much of the fish he happens to eat. It looks like he dropped most of it, ate some skin off of that, and let most of it drift downstream. So again, an indication that he's a really well-fed bear. That salmon carcass won't go to waste. It'll certainly be picked up by a lot of the younger bears we were watching before. And 503 catching a fish and now eating it right in front of 480 Otis. So again, another indication, or he was starting to eat it there at least, another indication that he's not concerned with Otis trying to steal his fish or take his fishing spot. 503 certainly showing signs that he could be a very assertive bear in the future. A couple of our smaller bears moving back into the vicinity of the falls, so we can see them on the falls low cam. So one snorkeling, looking for any salmon that can't swim away, sticking its face in the water. That's a technique that is universally employed by bears at Brooks River in late summer and fall when they're looking for dead and dying salmon that have collected downstream. They stick their face in the water, they keep their ears above the water. And that seems to be the most efficient way for them to find any salmon that are just laying on the bottom of the stream. For whatever reason, they like to keep their ears dry. I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, when they're snorkeling, we don't really see them stick their whole heads in the water very often. That younger bear, yeah, he both of these bears actually went up in that direction and sort of turned around. So I suspect that 402 might be up in that vicinity with her 4 cubs. She was there earlier in the broadcast. And when a bear kind of walks up, picks its head up, looks in a certain direction, and then decides to turn tail and move the other way, that could be an indication that they see or smell something that we don't. So 402 could be in that vicinity. They're just out of our line of sight right now if they are there. And there was one of those younger bears decided maybe try to go towards the lip of the waterfall, but then it saw the approach of 503, it looks like, and decided that was not an area that it wanted to go to. And there it goes, just walking by. When you're looking at younger bears and sometimes smaller adult females, even if they're mature adult females, occasionally it's difficult to tell whether they are just larger juvenile bears or if they are subadult, or excuse me, if they're juvenile bears or they are adult females, just smaller adult females. One of the ways that you can